Nier Automata has my #1 favorite video game soundtrack of all time. There's something otherworldly with the way the music blends itself with the game's desolate setting. The identity of Automata, while at first seems like Gooner bait, explores philosophical and existential themes that very few video games are able to achieve. Because of this brilliant combination, it's undeniable that Automata has had huge cultural impacts all over the world. 2B is one of the most recognizable icons in all of gaming, expanding out to other forms of mediums such as collabs and anime series. Despite having been released 7 years ago, its cultural influence is still very much well and alive. Most companies would dream of having an IP of this level of notoriety. I played Automata when I was still a late teen, and back then, I was very susceptible to influence, fascinated by deep subjects, and also incredibly horny. But it wasn't until I learned who the mastermind behind the game was that I really started to appreciate his work. Yoko Taro. This enigmatic figure, donning a creepy-looking helmet, was someone in the games industry that I deeply admired. I thought he was some kind of prophet. I watched countless interviews, commercials, presentations that he was a part of. There's something that I can't quite place about Automata's atmosphere and music alongside the brilliant plot made it one of my most memorable video games to this day. The only thought I had on my mind after finishing it is that I wanted more. At the time, school kinda got in the way, so I never really got a good chance to look at his other games. But now in 2024, I wanted to see just how much Yoko Taro has grown creatively. What other games has he directed, and are they any good? It wasn't until I learned about a certain gacha game that Yoko was involved in that ended its services this year that I really saw what direction he had taken in his career. This video is about Yoko Taro's legacy and about his shift into the mobile game industry, specifically gacha games, all of which at this current time have been terminated and no longer playable. I will examine the works that he was involved in, give a brief review, and answer the question as a fully fledged adult this time: is Yoko Taro really the prophet that I pictured as a kid, or was Automata just his one-trick pony? My name is Psyche, let's find out. I want to start with some disclaimers. This video is not all doom and gloom talking about the negative aspects of Yoko Taro's career. He did direct the Nier Replicant remake, and there was a single-player tabletop RPG called Voice of Cards that he's listed as the creative director. This is available on PC, consoles, and even mobile devices. Wow, a complete package with a single purchase? That's rare to see. So, not all of his modern projects were gacha. Only most of them. With my teenage brain, I thought he was a genius. I've talked about his ideas numerous times on this channel, and Yoko's unorthodox way of designing games is just not something you see every day. I never played the Drakengard games, and some pointed out that they're just not that good, but some would argue that it's precisely because of those imperfections that made it so special. Mowing down enemies isn't supposed to be fun, you're in the middle of a war after all. Yet in my eyes, a video game being fun should be its main goal. Why would someone play a game that's not fun? In 2014, Yoko Taro did a presentation explaining his way of creating projects that he referred to as making weird games for weird people. He had a small following, but he never had ambitions to appeal to a mainstream audience, and I find that pretty commendable. But after the massive success of Automata, that's when his stances began to shift. I think it's only fair to start off where his descent into mobile games began. In 2017, Yoko Taro directed his first gacha game, SinoAlice. It was first released in Japan, then globally in 2020. Yes, this meant that it had a gap of 3 years between JP and global. It's more ideal when all servers are synced up at the same time or at least with a very short delay. A gap of 3 years can kill excitement for some players. The game would last an impressive 6 years, shutting down in late 2023. Yoko was advertised as part of the creative team, and Keiichi Okabe, the same composer for Automata, also made the music here. I just want to say that all relevant footage is either gathered online or through word of mouth. I can't play any of these games to see for myself, neither can anyone actually. These games are no longer available, so the information I provide can never be too in-depth because no one can experience them firsthand anymore. So what's SinoAlice about? Well, in a setting known as the library, you play stories of the fictional characters from fairy tales, like Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and so on. After being coerced by two creepy-looking dolls, they set out on a journey to revive the author that wrote their story to change their fate in the tale. However, these fairy tale characters are demented and twisted versions of themselves that deviate from the normal story. For example, Cinderella goes on a rampage plotting vengeance against those that abused her. From a thematic standpoint, this is actually a pretty cool concept. I wanted to see the perspective of these fairy tales from their morally questionable views. What's the deal with the library and those dolls? Will they actually be able to change their tales? Well, no point in dwelling on this now since no one can play the game anymore, so unless you knew about SinoAlice, you wouldn't go searching for a walkthrough. Anyways, the gameplay on the other hand is sort of like a turn-based RPG with a class system. There are different variants of each fairy tale character and multiple game modes for it. I read some comments online that the grind for the game was pretty brutal and there were talks of pay-to-win elements if you were serious about going into PvP. Obviously, I can't confirm this for myself, but I'll attribute it to one of the reasons for the game's decline. Still, a 6 years runtime isn't bad for a mobile game. Plus, the story was concluded before the game shut down, so at least there was closure to everything. One of its main contributors to notoriety is something called Guild Wars. This is basically the game's PvP system. However, you will join up with your guild at the same time to do this. Aside from having a diverse class system, one major aspect about Guild Wars is that it always starts at the same time every day, meaning it's extremely time sensitive. Since Japan only has one time zone, it makes things a lot easier to coordinate, but globally, this is obviously gonna cause problems. Generally, with PvP elements in gacha games, if it's going to be a prominent mode within it, then there should be enough balancing so that even a free-to-play can at least stand a chance against whales. If it ever comes to a whale versus whale scenario, then free-to-plays will quit because it feels hopeless, then whales will quit because there's no one left to whale over. There are many other aspects that I haven't covered at all for SinoAlice, but it's definitely left its mark in Yoko Taro's career. Usually when I talk about gacha games that shut down, I can talk smack about it however I want. If a game ends its service, then you know that it either did something poorly or didn't do something well enough. From the intriguing concept to the jankiness of Guild Wars, SinoAlice is what many will refer to as great concept, poor execution. It's still far from a failure in my eyes, but given that this is Yoko Taro's first look into mobile games, not too bad I would say. Nier Reincarnation was technically my first ever gacha game that I tried for like 2 days. This one I even covered on this channel before it shut down earlier this year. When I heard about this game, I was genuinely excited. Automata had been living on the back of my mind for years before Reincarnation's announcement in 2021. I mean, look at the graphics on the trailer, look at the combat. It's a 3D brawler just like Automata. Keiichi Okabe is composing the soundtrack too? Looks like Yoko Taro's back in action. But there's just one problem. Reincarnation is a mobile gacha game. This immediately soured some expectations, myself included. I review mobile games on this channel, but I think I can speak for most people when I say that I'm very on the fence when a beloved franchise tries to have its next main entry as a gacha game. I figured I'd still give it a shot, since the staff that worked on it was the same that got me interested in the Nier universe. Plus, because of the brand recognition, it's likely going to perform very well. And to its credit, it did. Reincarnation did very well at launch. It was #1 on the JP App Store for its first month. The story follows a mysterious girl waking up in a massive structure called the Cage. She is guided by a floating ghost named Mama to uncover the stories of adventurers in order to change their fates. The presentation is done in a 2D format with side-scrolling silhouettes. This is obviously a far cry from the way the single-player Nier games do their stories. The gameplay, on the other hand, can seem pretty deceptive if you never played it. No, contrary to what it seemed like during marketing, the game is not a 3D brawler, it's an auto-battler. You put the game on auto and let your characters periodically do attacks or cast skills. You can move your allies around, except this changes nothing in combat. There's no skill-based elements like in the Yakuza games where you can reduce damage by blocking with the right timing or doing more damage with better positioning. Reincarnation was able to garner a small fanbase that rallied behind it, and while I can't speak anything about how the game was maintained over the years, there is one portion of the game that I didn't get to during my original end-of-service video on it. As you know, Automata had a brilliant story. I went to Reincarnation thinking that it would be more of the same stuff Yoko Taro is known for, a continuation or a deeper dive into the Nier universe. I was surprised to find that the story did eventually got to exactly that. The last arc of the main campaign, announced before the game's closure, indeed tied itself to Automata's world. I mean, look at that. That's the pod from the Yorha androids. This is the fated sequel. This is Nier 3. This is a continuation to the game that I held such high regards for. And yet, I don't really want to play it. Maybe it was the auto-battler gameplay. Maybe it was the shoehorned gacha system. Maybe it was the way the story was presented at first. Personally speaking, the fact that this was not a single-player 3D brawler just killed the excitement for this game for me. Even when the final arc was announced, how many players were still playing this and actually paid attention to the lore? By the time the game was about to shut down, how many people were able to witness what should have been the sequel to Automata? Only the dedicated fans got to experience this. It's a shame because from what I've heard, the story is actually pretty good and tied in the Nier universe together. Nier Reincarnation shut down in April this year, meaning it had a runtime of around 3 years. It did not receive a playable offline mode, so if you never got to play it, then you better look up a walkthrough online. Again, what I will give credit for is that the story did conclude before the game shut down, which is not something you see every day. It's a game that many tried out, but only few stuck around. I'm willing to bet that you've never heard of Yoko Taro's third gacha game entry. 404 Game Reset, or read as Error Game Reset, was announced as a partnership with Sega, with Yoko Taro taking the helm once again as the creative director. This one never made it to the West, but it began its services in April of 2023. Here's a brief rundown of the story. The game opens with the protagonist, presumably an average Japanese salaryman, walking down the streets when all of a sudden a red car collides straight into you, and you just die. But don't worry, your consciousness was taken into a cyberspace of sorts, and a waifu avatar called Ribbon explains to you that this is a world where the evil corporation Sega controls everything, and that one of its properties had gone rogue doing evil things. One of which, I guess, includes running over random pedestrians. She has suspended your consciousness and that you are summoned to the cyberspace to participate in a game known as Save the World, where you must defeat this source of evil to change your fate and stop yourself from dying in real life. The evil entity turns out to be someone called Outrun. After taunting you, you and Ribbon summon some allies and defeat her. Returning to real life, you find that you've changed your fate in the cyberspace, because now, the red car stops just before hitting you, and you end up surviving the ordeal. It's then that a mysterious contact named X explains that by defeating Outrun, you've cleansed a very small portion of this world that's corrupted by Sega's influence. They request that you join their mysterious resistance and take the fight to Sega. In case it wasn't made clear already, the characters you pull for and the antagonists that you're up against are named after classic arcade games made by Sega or an adjacent company like Capcom or Bandai Namco. Indeed, you will pull for waifu versions of Space Harrier, Virtua Fighter, Crazy Taxi, and so on. All of the character designs and flavor tidbits are references to their respective games, and the gacha animation as well as the overall aesthetics following the same theme. The presentation and UI also carry Yoko Taro's influences, with its monochrome colors, glitchy transitions, and blocky buttons. Once again, this is a pretty cool concept. The gameplay is bullet hell style, with 5 characters joining you while you evade projectiles and fire back. Bullet hell is a pretty niche genre, but hey, it's not like I know any other gacha games that have ever tried it. So after 2 terminated ventures, maybe 3rd time's the charm? Well, this video wouldn't have been made otherwise, because Error Game Reset shut down in January of this year. A measly 8 months runtime for the short-lived project. It didn't even make it to 1 year. The title of the game certainly prophesied something. The reason for its unceremonious shutdown is, well, my guess at least is that it never even garnered a big enough fanbase to be sustainable. Plus, I heard the gacha was a little stingy. Sega, seeing that the project was just not profitable, likely pulled the plug early. It's a shame. I probably would have checked this one out since the premise of it feels very fresh. So that's a total of 3 terminated gacha games having involvement with Yoko Taro, all varying in its level of success. I just want to point out that even before Error Game Reset released, articles stating its announcement already had some people throwing skepticism. Well, from Western audiences at least. The comments on this Gematsu article, for example, were not too pleased with the direction Yoko Taro is taking with his career. Reading community reactions after Eurogame Reset announced their end of service is where I really have to start questioning his decisions. If Automata was his one big hit, yet his all other projects were just wishy-washy gacha games, then what does the Yoko Taro brand even amount to? Does slapping that name on a title mean anything anymore? Now, usually when someone wants to defend Yoko Taro here, they'd say that he wasn't the sole manager of these games. After all, Yoko doesn't own his own company. All of his games were developed by an external party. There's no telling that he was the one that screwed up. Maybe it was the marketing team, or those greedy publishers, or unrealistic expectations that didn't allow him to reach his full potential. And look, you can blame these games' shortcomings on PokéLab, or Square Enix, or Sega, but in all three games, Yoko Taro is listed as the creative director. It's undeniable that he has had influence over the creative aspect of these games. No one knows for sure what his involvements were, but I think if you're going to credit Yoko Taro for his successful projects, then you should also treat the failures as the same. If you ask me, a lot of the praise Yoko Taro gets is not necessarily from the work he creates, but rather his responses to feedback and criticism. This middle-aged Japanese man is not afraid to openly say that he's doing this stuff for the money. He's not afraid to let other IPs collaborate with Automata and show as much thirst bait as they possibly can. To some, I'm sure his carefree attitude earns him a lot of respect, even though his more modern works are a bit more questionable. In this last portion of the video, I want to share my thoughts on the matter and explain where I personally draw a line. I would describe myself as a creative person. I tend to look at the more niche and less explored topics in gaming because it's new territory, and making content and having more and more people watch it means something to me. If you are an artist or a creative person, why wouldn't you want as many people to experience and appreciate your work? Due to the live service nature of gacha games, digital content can't be preserved at a museum. You can't play these games, nor can you look for these fringe titles unless you specifically know that they've existed. Once a live service game shuts down, that's it. No more game. In some cases, its legacy continues with private servers or an offline mode, but due to how niche gacha games are, most of them don't get that treatment. It's completely up to the discretion of the developer to do that. There's always something fascinating about finding a piece of media that one of these games left behind. The music, the story, the art, knowing that no one will be able to know that these works have existed just makes me think, what a damn shame. I think selling your talent and soul to creating these gacha games really hurt one's reputation and goes against what creativity is all about. I know Yoko Taro is often very upfront and transparent about why he does certain things, but I can't help but think that his modern works devalue him as a creative person. What's the point of creating all these cool ideas and stories if players can no longer see them? I feel my sentiments are generally shared by some other people too. The skepticism around him seems to be growing, and while I don't know if he'll ever make another hit like Automata, to me, Yoko Taro is a based person, but his newer works demonstrate to me that creatively, he is a shell of his former self. Part of me wants to understand that not all things are as simple as my explanation. Yoko Taro has done a lot of experimentation over the years, primarily exploring themes or ways to tell a story that doesn't get much spotlight. Now look, you can be very elegant or creative with ideas, but in the context of a video game, it also has to be a video game. The gameplay must feel good to play, and Automata was undoubtedly the first Yoko Taro entry that the general gaming audience was satisfied with. Automata's combat system feels smooth to play. What ends up happening with these more experimental games is that the story or the gameplay or the atmosphere will cater to a specific audience, but it won't be for everyone. Let me ask you this. How did you first learn about the Yoko Taro name? Which one of his entries did you play or hear about that put him on the radar for you? I'm willing to bet that for the vast majority, it's not Drakengard, it's not SinoAlice or Voice of Cards, or even Nier Replicant. It's that one game with the caked-up waifu android. It's the game catering to a broader and mainstream audience with its own unique ideas thrown in, and from what it looks to me, that seems to be like the direction he's going. I know that the games industry is as cutthroat as ever. You can't really do much experimenting now that the competition is way higher. Yoko Taro, now having close ties with Square Enix, one of the biggest gaming giants in Japan, may have had his hands tied to create something that does appeal more mainstream. If I was the head of Square Enix, I would tell Yoko, Don't bother making those weird games like Drakengard anymore. No, none of that. They only appeal to a niche crowd, no one's playing them. Make me another Automata. Make me another sensational gaming icon like 2B. Make me something profitable. In other news, earlier this year, Yoko Taro alongside Yosuke Saito, the executive officer of Square Enix, announced that they will be making a new game. In their words, it may be Nier or it may not be. Going by their track record, some people are already throwing shade and doubt. What if it's just another cash grab mobile game? Is Yoko Taro ever going to reclaim his glory? Even if it does turn out to be a new single-player Nier game, will it factor in lore from Reincarnation? Because if it does, I'm sorry to say this, you can't play that anymore. So players that missed out will be permanently missing a piece of the story. It's one of those situations that by making new lore of a franchise locked behind a mobile gacha game that shut down, that Yoko's kind of handicapped himself in expanding the lore further with his fans. This announcement was made about half a year ago, and there has been no new updates. So for now, we wait. So what do you think? Is Yoko Taro still the creative genius people thought him to be? Or has his legacy declined throughout his career? What truly is hidden under that creepy-looking helmet? I hope you enjoyed this semi-deep dive into a set of forgotten mobile games, and if you wish to see more gacha-related content, you know what to do. Thank you for watching. As always, have fun out there.